Today, I'm going to talk about a couple of the ways I make money every month as a filmmaker that don't require a huge following on YouTube. Now, to preface this, my income varies wildly month to month. I've had some very lucrative months where I've made tens of thousands of dollars, followed by a month where I made absolutely nothing. And this could depend on a couple different factors, like just general slowdown of the industry. During the winter, kind of productions take a bit of a pause for a month or two and not much happens. Or it could be due to an economic downturn or a global pandemic. Or sometimes it just comes to billing schedules where I'm working on a project, but I'm not going to be billing them for it until next month. So I gotta make sure I have the capital every month to weather those sort of slow periods. So the first is labor, and that's kind of a given. That's basically what anybody does if they have a salary job or an hourly job. They go out and they trade their labor and their skill and their time for money. Now, that can be a day rate, project rate, you can work out hourly rates. Everybody kind of operates in their own different way. I tend to do flat rates for post-production because I've become very good at assuming how long a project will actually take me. And I work it out in a way that works out to the most profit for time. But when we're out on set and working on, say, a documentary piece, we often work it out as day rates. Very seldom do we do half-day rates because if we get hired for a project, the likelihood of us being able to take another project for the rest of the day is very unlikely because our first project could run long, which would screw the second project. Basically, most of the industry operates on either flat rates or day rates. It's up to you to figure out how you want to structure your business and your billing method, but those are kind of the two I operate on for the most part. The second way I make income is with my gear. I have purchased cameras and lenses and lights over the years, and every time they come out with me on a project, I bill for their use. And I set my gear prices based on what the rental fee for it or something similar would be from a rental house. And I usually take that number and I just drop it by 15 or 20 bucks or something because I don't need to go get it. It's my gear, it's already accessible to me. There's no additional maintenance that needs to go into it that I wouldn't be doing to it anyways. So for example, a Sony a7S Mark II, which is a camera I own and that I'm shooting with right now, in Toronto tends to rent for about $180 Canadian per day. So if I'm bringing that camera out that I own on a client shoot, I might bill 160 bucks a day. But I also co-own a bit of gear with a few collaborators. So for example, I co-own a C300 Mark II with a friend of mine and a regular collaborator. We each put down half the price and we own it 50-50. So when he gets hired for a project and goes out with that camera, I make half the kit fee and vice versa. So I don't even need to be working on a project to generate a couple $100 from a rental fee every time that camera goes out. You can also rent your gear out, which is 100% based on your own comfort level. Some people do it all the time and have had no problems, but there are things like insurance that you have to take into consideration. I only rent my gear outright to people I know personally and some of my regular collaborators. For example, last month, a buddy of mine needed a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K, so he just rented mine. I know him, I work with him all the time, I trust him 100%, so I don't mind just handing him the camera and sending him an invoice afterwards. So that's another way you can make your gear generate you revenue. It's likely not gonna be quit your job money by any means, and you have to spend the money on the gear to own it and begin renting it, but it is a good way to use what you might already have available to you as a way to make money. So the next one on the list is selling stock footage licenses. So I've talked about this before and I'm going to do a follow-up video where I talk a little bit more in detail about it, but I started producing stock footage in June of 2018. I made my first ever stock footage sale in August of 2018, so 2 months later, and there has not been a single month since then that I haven't made some money off of my stock footage sales. So I use a service called Blackbox Global. You upload your footage to their FTP and they distribute it to Vimeo, Adobe Stock, Shutterstock, and a few others, and they take a small cut on every sale. Now I use them because I don't really want to manage my stock footage portfolio. I just kind of want to upload it, set it and forget it. I don't want to have all these additional accounts, and they have a great collaboration tool. So some of my stock footage is produced with some of my regular collaborators. They have accounts and we can set it up so that they automatically get their cut, as opposed to say me receiving income for a stock footage sale and then me having to distribute it to my buddies. They just get paid automatically, no questions asked, based on the percentage we set out when we upload the footage. So just a quick run of some of the numbers here. In 2020, I made $3,912.39 US in stock footage sales, meaning that I made a monthly average of about $326.03. Now, that's just an average. Obviously, some months were higher than others. For example, in June 2020, I made $826 US, but in March, I only made $111. Just note, you don't need expensive cameras or high-end lenses or anything to make and sell stock footage. You can totally use a cell phone. You just gotta make sure that the shots look intentional and professional and they're well composed and the content of the shot is good. I have purchased stock footage clips for clients that I suspect were shot on a cell phone on like a little Osmo gimbal or something. It worked with the edit, it looked well composed, it looked intentional, and it went into a commercial that aired across the country. So you can absolutely generate revenue just using your phone if you know what you're doing with it. Doesn't matter if it's shot on an ARRI Alexa or Red or a cell phone or a DSLR, they're all gonna sell for the same price. So as long as you know what you're doing, you can definitely make money off of your cell phone footage. Now here's a couple clips just really quickly that have generated me a good amount of cash over the last couple of years. So the next thing on my list of income sources is not really filmmaking based, but it's something everybody should be doing if you have any sort of cash set aside. And that is investing in the markets. Now, quick disclaimer, I am not a financial advisor. Everything I'm talking about is purely based on my opinion and my experiences. If you do want to invest, I recommend you do your own research or you talk to a financial advisor and figure out what's best for you. Don't take my word for it. I'm just a guy on the internet. I'm doing this purely for entertainment and just to talk about something. Now, you can invest in individual stocks. That's not something I do, mostly because it requires a lot of maintenance and a lot of observing the stocks and watching the markets and a lot of active involvement. I'm much more of a slow, passive investor. I put money into my investments every single week, and I've got a number of mutual funds and index funds and ETFs that I invest in. And what those are basically shares that are comprised of the stocks of tons of different companies. And the benefit to that is if one company starts to do really badly or starts to lose money and the market value goes down, your share is not impacted as heavily because they might only comprise 1% of that fund. The other companies in that fund might make up for it by doing really well. Of course, there are economic downturns where everything loses value and you start to lose money. We saw that in 2020 at the top of the pandemic. All the markets tanked. There was a huge sell-off, but by letting it ride and holding off and not selling, shares eventually regained their value and now I'm profiting more than I was. You don't know what the market's gonna do year over year, but if you're buying into funds like this, your intention is to put that money there and let it sit for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. The longer it's there, the more it will grow in value because the market trends upwards over time. It has throughout almost all of history. And if the market all tanks and never recovers, then we've got much bigger problems than your personal investments as a whole. But regardless, this is something everybody should be doing. Doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you've got cash you know you're not going to need, you should be investing it in the markets or in long-term investments because the longer that money is in there, the more money you will make over time. The last thing I'm going to talk about is AdSense. Now, I know I said you don't need a huge following on YouTube, and you really don't to generate at least some money, because every little bit counts. I just recently crossed the threshold for monetization, and I was able to start doing it. Now, I don't have a huge amount of viewership, and my views have been pretty steady on my films and a couple videos that do get watched, and I'm making like 80 cents a day, but it ultimately adds up. That would be a couple $100 by the end of the year. You never know what will put your channel past the threshold for monetization. I mean, I was making podcasts that were up to 2 hours long and I was putting them out there and they got a decent amount of viewership. Like they generated me some watch hours, but not quite what I was hoping. And it wasn't until I put out 3 short horror films that were all under 6 minutes long that got viewed enough and generated me enough subscribers to pass the monetization threshold. And now my channel is making a little bit of cash, and the more I create for it, the more money it will generate me long term. Basically, the moral to this whole story is there's no get-rich-quick scheme, but as a filmmaker and a creative, you have skills that can generate you revenue and make you a healthy, lucrative living. You might not become a millionaire, but there's money out there to be made.